Jenny Abegg, welcome to Dirtbag Rich.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. Different time zones.
Our mutual friend Hannah Hall calls you a mountain goat. And I wanted to ask you right off the bat, what is it about mountains that calls to you and what keeps you coming back? And if you can share any maybe specific moments you've had in the mountains that really illustrate this, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I think this question is a little hard for me because it's kind of, this is going to sound so cheesy and cliche, but it's kind of like asking someone, what is it about like the air that keeps you coming back? Like the air that you breathe. Like it is like, it's my language, it's my foundation. I think I grew up going to the mountains a lot. I grew up with parents who like to go to the mountains a lot. And it continues to just be the way that I connect with like myself, with others, with the world. It's where I go when I need a recalibration. And I can think of like most of my solid, like most important friendships on the planet are people who I have gone to the mountains with consistently. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's just my medium. Um, Yeah, there have been times when I've gone alone. I think maybe you were there that year, Blake, when I was in El Chalten, Patagonia. And I did a loop around like the Chalten Massif, and I did it alone. And it was like I don't always catch like the psych to do things, but when I do, I kind of know it and I just follow it. And that year I really felt like that was I just was compelled to go on this like 60-mile excursion around the Chalten Massif, 12 miles of which were running on glacier. And I wanted to do it alone. And that day stands out in my mind as like one of the most important days of my life because it just was a day of feeling very close to myself, very close to the earth. And like my life was in my hands in a way. And I think our lives are always in our hands, but there's something about going into the mountains that makes that really stark and obvious. And maybe I need it. I think there's times when I like need um like a set of more powerful emotions than what general life can give.
Hmm.
And people find that in different ways through like music or drugs or um yeah, the outdoors. And I definitely find it through being in the mountains. Yeah.
And and that tour around the Chalten Massif that you did, I believe that normally takes a week for people to walk. You did it in roughly half a day, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah,
And
I
you
think
you were
that
running
you're being
solo.
kind. I think it took me like 15 hours or something.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's only slightly more
Yeah.
than half a day.
Yeah, that's true.
And you were also traversing the Patagonia ice field by
Yes.
yourself. That's an extremely remote. Did you even have cell phones? Any form of like rescue service? Maybe a
I
satellite?
did. Yeah, I'm not that cavalier, I guess. But I did not have cell service. I had it in reach, and I had somebody in town that I was connected with that knew like my rescue options really well. But there was one moment I passed I maybe just passed one group of people my whole day out there, and you're right, it's like a mountaineering route, and so there are groups of people who do it with heavy packs and will take like a week or like 5 days to do it. And I was out there on the Patagonia ice field, Southern Patagonia ice field, in shorts and a t-shirt and running shoes. And I was like just jumping over crevasses. And I passed this group of people with mountaineering boots, gaiters, crampons, ice axes, ropes, 70-liter backpacks. And I felt like equal parts ashamed and exuberant. Like I was like, wow, somehow I've chosen to do this differently than those people. And I feel like my way is more fun, but I also feel like they probably think that I'm totally crazy and I need to like veer over here so I don't have to talk to them. So yeah,
Uh,
there was absolute freedom for me to be out there alone.
there's a website for bicycle tourists called Crazy Guy on a Bike. And I wonder
Uh-huh.
how many moments you've had where someone has called you the crazy lady on the trail, the crazy lady on the knife edge ridge. Uh, can
The
you
crazy
just
lady in running shoes where
cra-
she shouldn't be wearing running shoes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe you can zoom out a little bit and tell people what exactly it is you do in the mountains. You do many different things in the mountains. Maybe just walk us through the various stages of your relationship to the
Yeah.
mountains and what you like to do.
Yeah, it started as a kid, going to the mountains on backpacking trips with my family. We grew up like on the northern side of the North Cascades. And then it morphed with my family into doing mountaineering trips together. So like climbing Mount Baker or doing the Ptarmigan Traverse in 5 days as a backpacking trip. And then in college and after college, I guided at a mountaineering camp. So there was just a lot of like mountaineering, snow, typical like Pacific Northwest stuff going on at that point. And then I got into rock climbing. And I think that took me by storm and changed my life. You know, I did the whole like quit my job, move into my van, like mold my life around this sport, but also this lifestyle and this community. And um, just focused on pure rock climbing and alpine rock climbing, but yeah, the vertical for a long time, for a decade, close to a decade. And then throughout COVID, I got really into running and started to like find these ways to like bring the two sports together. So, um, like running long distances in the mountains, like taking a route that might take other people a week and trying to do it in a day. And maybe it involves some like what people typically view as like they might need a rope or more technical terrain. And I, with my climbing skills, could just like breeze through those sections, just me, myself, and my trail running shoes. And that to me, it's become like a new way of exploring over the course of the last like 4 years. And it is pure freedom to be
Hmm.
in the mountains in that way.
Hmm.
So,
So you have
yeah. And
this
I still rock climb a lot, still
hmm,
love it so much. It's my roots for sure.
this base of mountaineering and then extensive rock climbing experience, and then on top of that, long distance running, which makes
Yeah.
you kind of a Swiss Army knife. You I'm
Yeah.
imagining you are just capable of doing things like, for example, with the aforementioned mutual friend Hannah Hall,
Hmm.
you've done some pretty incredible traverses across long distances in the mountains, where kind of like when you were down in Patagonia, you really had to commit to like going far and doing a lot of vertical with minimal gear and with some
Hmm.
fairly serious consequences if you are forced to bivvy, if you have to spend a night up in the mountains. Am
Yeah.
I overselling you at this point, Jenny?
Yeah, to me you are. I'm like, I'm just derping out there. But
Derping.
I think that's where it has just become like the medium that is so, yeah, normal to me and to some of my adventure buddies. It's funny because I experience a lot of anxiety. I would describe myself as like an anxious human, but when I'm in the mountains, I have so much less anxiety than the people around me. I don't, and like this could be a bad thing. Like we could read into this as like this is risky, dangerous, but when I'm in those situations that you just described of like, there being a point of no return or like could get caught out by darkness or cold. Like I don't feel nervous. And I mean, okay, that's wrong. I do feel nervous, but I feel so in the moment and so present that there's kind of no space for the mind to spin around like it does in
Mm,
normal life for me. And so I think it's all about just executing and quote unquote surviving in a way, but in the best sense of that word. And I think there's like a stripped down nature to life where I can't ruminate. I can't let my mind like go to places that like really don't exist yet, um, in terms of being anxious.
Are you
So,
one of those people who, like, when there's an emergency situation, your blood, excuse me, your heart rate actually like
hmm,
decreases, like you become calmer and more focused, whereas other people might become more agitated and frenetic?
you know, I'm actually not. Yeah. So I think there's something I'm not like a first responder hero. Like I don't think I'd make a good ER nurse or doctor. But it's something about, yeah, being in these non-emergent situations in the mountains that are still dangerous and risky but I find them quite controlled actually and quite predictable.
Can you give me an example, perhaps? A moment where from the
Mm.
outside, someone would say, ooh, this is a very harrowing situation. And to you, you're like, this is a manageable problem to be solved.
I think that I notice this a lot in the preparation for trips where like a partner might be really just fastidious about packing or about making an Excel spreadsheet with timestamps of where we're gonna want to be when, um, and having all of the bailout routes in their mind. And for me, the natural approach, and I'm not saying either is right or wrong at all, but the way that I naturally do it is just to like pack a bag, hope that what I need is in the bag, and then go. And if a situation arises where we can't keep going, we'll figure it out. I think there's a lot of places in life where I don't feel like the most confident human,
Hmm.
but when it comes to being in the mountains and like staying safe in the mountains, I think I have a lot of trust in my skill set and background. And so there's like less need, maybe mostly in the preparation stages, to just like freak out about things or get anxious about things. I just can't wait to go. I just can't wait to get out there. And then I know it'll be okay. Like, and that's a very general thing to say because sometimes it is not okay. But I know that there are most situations like I'll be able to handle.
Do you call yourself a mountain athlete?
Yeah, that's the term that I have started using more in the last few years. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have been like, Blake, I am a rock climber. But um, since I introduced running into things, I feel more like a mountain athlete. I'm obviously missing so many skill sets. Like I'm not a good ice climber. I'm not a good skier. But when it's summer in the mountains, I feel pretty competent.
All right, one more question about the mountains before we start talking about money and work and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which mountain ranges in the world do you have the closest relationships to? Maybe even, tell me if this is a stretch, an intimate relationship with?
Mhm. I think if I were to name like one range in the world that I feel at home in most, it's the North Cascades, and like specifically North Cascades National Park, but also like the whole of the Washington mountain wilderness. I like grew up exploring it. 3 years ago, my friend Caitlin and I traversed like a high route from the northern tip of the North Cascades to the southern tip. And I think that was such a cool experience because I gained like this mental map of this range that
Hmm.
I've played in for so long, but never like journeyed from north to south in like that. And it is a lifelong like experience and goal for me to like know that range like the back of my hand. And I will never know it that well, but I think yeah, it feels like a cool thing to aim for, to just get to know that one place. And then because I've spent a lot of time there, I gravitate towards ranges with glaciers. So like the Chaltén area in Patagonia feels like home to me. And the Bugaboos in British Columbia, or the Coast Range in British Columbia, they feel like home to me because they're like North Cascadian in nature.
North Cascadian in nature. Should turn that into an acronym. Um, let's talk about how you're able to create this life where you can spend such extended time in the mountains. And I want to start by asking you, at what point in your life were you spending the most time playing outdoors and the least time working for money?
There was a time in my late 20s, early 30s when I didn't work at all for a while, and then I piecemeal worked for a good 3 or 4 years. And I think there was like during that time I like posted up in a town, actually in the town that I currently live in right now, Leavenworth, for some months to work in the service industry to make money to then take more time off. So those were the golden years. I think back on them with so much just gratitude for the fact that I did that. I wish I'd done it for longer. Um, but
Is
yeah,
that when
and
you were
mostly
living in Old Blue, your van?
I was, and a lot of that time I was living in my van, my 1995 GMC Safari van named Old Blue, which I still have. Um, yeah, so like focused on Old Blue, but also like I spent a winter in Spain and I rented a place in Leavenworth for 6 months and like I didn't carry much stuff around with me. It was always just me and Old Blue, but I'd post up in various places for some time.
Now, how about the reverse of that question? At what point in your life have you spent the least time outdoors? So let's talk about your adult life when you're really in control.
Hmm.
The least time in the outdoors and the most time working for money, whether that's happily working for money or discontentedly.
Hmm. Okay, there's bookends right here. There was before I moved into Old Blue, I I hadn't yet discovered this life, and I was working Monday through Friday in a public school in Seattle, and I was just stirring. Every part of me was like scheming and stirring to get out of that. And I had just discovered my love for climbing. Um, I had started therapy. Uh, I had just started dating, which is I grew up in a very religious community and didn't start dating till my late 20s. And so life was growing, like the world was growing so that was then. And then I actually feel like now is I will look back on now as the time when I put my nose to the grindstone and worked really hard. But I have an eye for balance that I am so grateful for. And so I mean I just got back from like a 3 week trip to Red Rocks and am going to Patagonia for a month in February. But when I am working, I am working. Um, and
so
so
so nose to the
yeah.
grindstone still looks like 3 weeks in Red Rocks, a month in Patagonia.
Yeah, it's a very work hard, play hard lifestyle because now I'm home in Leavenworth right now and I'm like pulling long days of work and my life kind of revolves around the business that I've created with some friends. So it's very feast and famine right now.
Maybe walk me through what you've done for money over the years, and
Yeah.
then definitely include what you're doing right now, this new hyper intense project.
Okay. Yeah. Um, my first job was working at McDonald's. When I was 16, I uh, was on the Canadian junior national ultimate frisbee team, and my mom wanted me to earn my money for my plane ticket. So that was my first experience of work. Um, and I earned my money for my plane ticket and promptly quit. Um, in my 20s, I spent a lot of time working at camps. Um, and working is not the right word. It was more volunteering at camps. And then out of college, I worked for a wilderness therapy company based out of Oregon. And I felt like I was making more money there than I could imagine. I think my salary was like $25,000 a year. Um, After that, I worked in the public schools in Seattle for less than 2 years.
What were you doing for them?
I actually got a master's in teaching and then worked um, as a teacher's assistant for 2 years, like supporting one-on-one a middle school girl that was like health challenged. Um, and yeah, I loved that job, but it wouldn't fit into my life right now. Um, and through that job, I think I was making again like 25 grand a year. I saved 10 grand in a year and quit my job, moved into my van and just that was my money for the year. And then I got really drawn to that lifestyle and didn't want to stop it. And so I started to pick up various writing gigs, writing freelance for like Climbing Magazine and Alpinist and REI.com, Gore-Tex, just whatever I could find. And then started guiding a little bit too. So that was my way of like staying on the road while being able to pay the bills. And my living expenses were so low. So it didn't take much. And I probably saved during that time too.
Let me just ask really quickly, was it easy for you to become a freelance writer? Did you have a background in this? Yeah. How
Yeah,
did that
that's a good
emerge?
question. I think there's a lot of privilege there that like helped me get to where I was. Uh, I was a I was a female that was climbing at a certain level, and I had a photographer boyfriend at the time. And so that those two things combined, like I had a lot of contacts in the industry because of both of those things. And it kind of snowballed. And it turns out that like there's a lot of people looking for good workers, good writers, good whatever. And a little bit of like prompt emailing and prompt delivery can go a long way once you like get your first in. But I think getting my first in was like total privilege for me. And I had the right people in my life at the right time. Um, okay, so after that period of freelance writing, one of the places that I was freelancing for was a publication called Switchback Travel. And I was doing gear reviews for them. I think the first thing I reviewed for them was a pair of 510 guide tennies, like approach shoes. And they asked me to come on full time. And I was like, how about part time? So I came on as their third employee and was working 20 hours a week consistently. And that my life kind of changed at that point. It was like the first time in my like climbing life that I had consistent work um, and I also was like wanting a bit more stability. I moved to Bend, Oregon, and my goal was to become stronger at Smith Rock, and like focus on climbing in like a more stable way. And and I think that like adult life kind of began at that point. I mean, it all snowballs. And a year later, I had bought a house, was living in the garage while the four tenants in the main house paid my mortgage. And and then it just I continued to work at Switchback up until last year. So 7 years there, working 20 hours a week and keeping my expenses low enough that that totally worked for me. And I could stack my hours and work 40 hours some week and play the other week or um, take vacation time and string together long periods of time off. And then and then that snowballed into what I'm currently doing right now. So the founder of Switchback, the editor in chief of Switchback, and myself all left Switchback, sold Switchback, um, and are starting a new online publication called Better Trail. And what we're trying to do is modernize the outdoor gear review space, but also infuse our reviews with sustainability information. So trying to
Mm.
help people who are shopping for gear have all the tools they need to shop responsibly. And it's been a crazy year of being a business owner of a startup business, um, taking a 50% pay cut from what I was making before. But I'm so glad I did it. It's been so rewarding, whether or not it actually like takes on and like makes us money. Like I think it's been such a cool experience and so cool that my life was set up in a way that I could handle taking a huge pay cut and not have it affect me too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
During those 7 years at Switchback, when you were working 20 hours a week on average, you said that the money worked for you. Were you also able to save over that time?
I was, yeah. I've always been a massive saver, probably like to my detriment. Like I don't buy things very well. Um, and I think honestly, if I'm going to be truly honest, part of this is that I didn't drink alcohol or coffee until I was like in my early 30s. And so I didn't eat out. I lived a pretty like, I don't know, ascetic lifestyle. And so I just saved a lot of money, even though I wasn't making much money at all. I was just a healthy saver. And so when I started this job at Switchback and had like a regular W-2 coming in, I was able to buy a house in Bend. And this was 6 years ago, so houses were definitely like half the price that they are now. And I thought I was paying too much, but I bought a house for $400,000 and it had, and I was only willing to buy a house if it could help, if it could pay for itself. And so like paying for living was always the thing that I was against. Like I've lived in closets. I've lived in like little like cordoned off like parts
Do
of basements.
do you mean paying rent is what you're against?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did I say? Paying for
Paying for
living.
living. Yeah, that's just a big
Paying
umbrella.
paying rent. Paying rent. Yeah. And I've paid rent for the closet and for the basement and for the various things, but like very minimal rent. And so I was always able to save. And so I bought this house in Bend, and it was a 4-bedroom house with a converted garage. And I moved into the garage and kept the tenants in the main house, and they paid my mortgage for me. And so now I had this house, but I was saving a lot of money because I didn't have housing expenses because they were being paid by my renters. And it can kind of just snowball when you're not, when you're paying a mortgage and putting money into something that's gaining you equity, and especially something like the housing market in Bend, like that house has doubled in value. And I really part luck there, like buying it when I did. Um, so it's doubled in value. I haven't spent much of a cent towards it. So I've saved all that money. And then you can kind of just like do it again. And then if you want to, you could do that again too. If you're willing to like, so basically what I did was I did it again, and I moved away from Bend during the pandemic. I rented out that garage unit. And so now I'm like cash flowing $1,500 on this house that I'm gaining equity on. It's like doubled in value. So I'm able to take money out of it and buy a house in Leavenworth. And the extra $1,500 that I'm making from my house in Bend, the and then that down payment that I was able to take out of my house in Bend, with that, I'm able to buy another house and kind of do it all again, because then I converted the back bedroom, which is a master suite, into its own unit here in Leavenworth, and I have a tenant here. So now I have two houses and I'm not paying the mortgages for them. So it kind of is like it's a cool game to play. And it's a little hard to play it now, I think, because of the way interest rates are and the housing market's insane. But
Mm.
I think I got really lucky that I got into it at the right time. And I'm not gonna keep moving. I feel like I don't want to leave Leavenworth. So I'm staying where I am, but I'm able to save still quite a bit of money because I I made a game out of my housing situation.
You climbed the property ladder, as they
I
say.
climbed the property ladder. There's a
There.
saying and I got kind of deep into this world for a while. Um, there's a saying that you live the way that most people don't want to live so that you can live the way that most people can't live. And so, I mean, for
Mm.
years I like slept in closets and my van, and then lived in like a kind of shitty garage for a while, living the way that most people don't want to live. So that now, I mean, I'm already there where I can live the way that most people can't live, which is like totally like housing cost free.
I imagine when you were in that garage or that closet, though, you didn't feel deprived. I imagine it felt like a bit
Certainly not.
energizing, a bit like an adventure, or like,
Mhm.
the way that the climbing community uses the term dirtbag. It's a badge of honor
Mhm.
to be a dirtbag. It signifies a certain level of creativity, a certain level of non-neediness, and dedication to the
Yes.
cause. So was that all true for
Yeah,
you in
that's so
these?
well put.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of felt purposeful. I loved the resourcefulness of it. I, I come from good lineage with this. My mom is 75 and she still collects cans and brings them into the can redemption center, and that's her spending money. So like the resourcefulness is there, and I love that feeling. And it starts to feel like a game, like an adventure. Like you're kind of like taking kind of boring life and making it spicy a little bit. And you just feel like you're skirting the system a little bit in a way that feels fun. I do remember one time when I was living in that closet when I had a friend in town and I didn't have a car at this point either. And I realized that I had nothing to offer my visiting friend. I didn't have a place like a bed to sleep on. I didn't have a way of like getting them around. I had nothing, no hospitality to give other than like my time out. But that was like I remember feeling that as like a hard feeling.
Hmm.
So there are trade-offs,
Yeah.
but
I,
yeah,
I know in my own life, having slept in many strange places and being someone else's guest, it feels very rewarding to occasionally splurge and have a place, a multi-bedroom place for a little bit where I can host friends, I can host dinners and parties, and uh,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah,
very gratifying.
yeah,
So, okay, we're going to start edging into the question about purpose right now, and I think we can get there. I want to come back to the business you're building right now, Better Trail, and you said that it's incredibly meaningful work or project or effort. This startup, you're not sure if it's going to pan out in the long run, but what makes it so satisfying, Jenny?
I think like the number one thing that makes it so satisfying is the team, this group of individuals, the three of us that have worked together for years and identified each other as like people that we wanted to keep in our lives. We're like perfect workmates and we complement each other really well. And so that those relationships are ones that I'll have for the rest of my life. They're like my brothers. Um, and then I think there's a joy in building something that I didn't really know existed. Like taking, I mean, it started out as just like conversations and dreaming about something, and now it's like this breathing thing on the internet. And I can't imagine what it would be like to like have that become like a breathing brick and mortar store. Not that it will for us, but like there's so much satisfaction in this, and I understand now the satisfaction that entrepreneurs must have in building things. And it could honestly, at most points, it could be anything that we were building. Like it's just fun to build and to be
Mm,
creative and to
hmm.
like have something grow. But then I think the cherry on top is that what we are growing feels like it feels additive. I live in this outdoor space through my hobbies, my friendships, now my work, and it feels nice to be hopefully providing it with a resource that's doing good, that's like helping people shop responsibly. Um, and yeah, it finally feels additive. Like for so long, writing gear reviews almost felt shameful to me. It did feel shameful to me. Like there's so many gear reviews on the internet. Sure, I could like spin it to say that they like are helping people or but it felt hard to be just another voice in the choir of like talking about gear and helping people consume. But what we're working on now just it feels beside that. Like it feels like we're adding something that can that can really help people do good. And the more I get into this work, the more I just realize that like my stand that I want to preach on is that you should just buy less. People should just have less stuff. And it's so hard to purchase responsibly. So just don't purchase and just use what you have. And that is my mother speaking straight through me. But I think it's fun to have a platform
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Uh, at at some point, you'll need to earn money from that statement. Are you trying to encourage people to make like one solid purchase that is ethical and this thing is gonna last them a long time, and then for the next 10 years don't buy anything new? But
I know it's kind of like
how does
it's
that
a hard
value
business
manifest
model, hey?
itself? Yeah.
Yeah. It's have you heard of like the Patagonia like don't buy this shirt campaign that actually like sells so many shirts? And
Hmm.
it's paradoxical and it's not like it's too bad that the only way that we make money is through people's purchases. Because I truly stand behind this statement of like people should just buy less. But yeah, I think exactly what you said is like, if people are going to buy, we can at least help them buy well and buy durable and buy well built and like sustainably built. People are going to need a new ski jacket or a new down jacket. And then I do hope that like just through the content on the site and the general like ethos that we communicate, that we can help people see that repairing is cool, that patching your jacket is hip and like you should do it rather than buy a new one.
Hmm.
But I think we have to rely on the fact that humans are humans and will consume and will continue to buy things, and that will make us money. It's a weird paradox to live in,
Yeah.
for sure.
I'm curious too, kind of like I asked what the history of how you made money was. I'm curious what the history of your sense of purpose in your work has been. Earlier, you were involved in what we'd call education, like
Hmm.
wilderness therapy, which can be deeply impactful and meaningful.
Hmm.
Um, Working in the public school system, and then you were in these 7, maybe more years of yeah, more gear review, writing for the
Hmm.
outdoor industry. But was that kind of a lull in your? Did it go from
Hmm.
like high to low, and now you're
Hmm.
creeping back up on the purpose scale now?
That's such a good observation. I so I grew up in the church, and my life was to be of service to God. And I spent my teen years, my college years, my 20s, like feeling so obligated. Like I was going to say compelled, but it was actually like so obligated to sacrifice my life. I remember moving to East Vancouver. I grew up in British Columbia. Moving to East Vancouver one summer, all my other friends went to Juneau, Alaska to like work and play in the mountains, and I felt like I needed to do exactly what I didn't want to do so that I could be of service to God. So there was some like really bad thought, like I don't know, black and white thinking and like skewed thinking around like what service looked like at that time in my life. And honestly, like I didn't have a self. I like woke up sometime in my late 20s and felt like I didn't have a self. Like I had never asked what I enjoy. I had never like felt like it was okay to do things for myself. And at this point, I had like been working wilderness therapy. I tutored a lot. I mentored refugees. I was working in the public schools. And I really thought that my life would be revolved around this like service, even to the extent of like thinking that I maybe should be homeless and live on the streets so that I could serve people in that way. I mean, it was very drastic
Mm,
thinking that I can now look back on and like correct in many ways. But I the pendulum swung. Like when I left the church and started therapy, it swung to like close to hedonism in the sense that I just wanted to be able to do identify what I wanted, what I loved doing and do it. Like I felt like I had been deprived for so many years. And so climbing was that thing that I like swung the pendulum into. And it became just important for me to like survive better, like to put energy back into myself and like finally do the things that I wanted to do. Um, and I do think that at this point in my life, that pendulum is swinging back a little bit more. I really the goal is for it to swing back more, as like even more, which I think is hard when I travel so much and I want to be able to be involved in certain like volunteer efforts or communities at home. There's still a lot of shoulds going on, and I don't have I have more reflections than answers to this question. But um,
Let me see if I
yeah.
got this straight. Earlier in your life, in your 20s, purpose came more from church, religion, and then also some of the education work you were doing. And then late 20s, the the big switch,
Hmm.
and church is out and rock climbing becomes your god. And to
Hmm.
financially sustain yourself, you're doing freelance writing, gear reviews, which is not necessarily making the world any better, but you're not really worried about that because you're focused on finally doing something for yourself.
Hmm.
Um, And now the ship is righting itself, so to speak, and
Yes.
you're yeah,
Yeah.
huh.
Yeah, and I want the ship to right itself even further. Like I think that um I can be a fairly like small picture person. Like I can get really absorbed in like thinking big picture about like my impact on the world and how to be a good human does not come. I think I maybe burn myself out of that kind of thinking. I can just remember
Mm,
like years in my 20s of like existential like thought. And I have like shirked that way of thinking. But um yeah, and so I find a lot of joy and purpose in like the minutia of day-to-day work that might not have like huge impact on the planet or people, even though now we're trying to have more of an impact with Better Trail.
mm.
But
Do you have
yeah.
do you have some hangups or some difficult feelings around the sort of self-centeredness of the outdoors world? I'm just sort of detecting this in what you're saying. So you really want to right the ship, like you don't want to just keep doing cool stuff. I'm putting words into your mouth at this point.
Mhm.
You don't just want to keep doing cool stuff in the mountains. That's very satisfying and challenging, but you want to have another source of purpose or meaning or feeling like you're contributing to something bigger than yourself and like your cool friends and
Mhm.
all of your collective outdoor pursuits. Am I hitting the nail on the head here?
Yeah, I think I go back and forth. I think some days I just feel like as humans, we're all on this planet just truly trying to survive. And I'm one of those people who is truly just trying to survive. And the more I can like take care of myself and survive, that's just what I would want everyone to do. There's so many flaws to that thinking, but I think some days that's my feeling. And I've alluded to the fact that I live with a lot of anxiety, and I think some of that is anxiety driven. And then other times, and especially as I get older, I've started to feel like there's so much space to give back and um, to to do good in the little world that I've carved out. Like, okay, so I've spent my 20s and 30s finding this world and now working hard to carve it out. And now that I'm solid in this mountain world, this gear review, like all the different facets of my life, now now I'm not just surviving in this world, and it's time to like think about ways to give back. But I do think that it took me a while to get there because for a while we're all just trying to survive in a way. Um, but I think there's different ways of thinking about that, and I'm definitely influenced by a little bit of like baggage around sacrifice that I grew up with.
Yeah. Can you just tell me a bit more about this religious upbringing and especially what tipped the scales in your later 20s? What drove you to leave?
Yeah. Yeah, so I grew up, my family was very religious. My dad was a professor at a religious university. My mom grew up Baptist. I Youth group was always like a big deal, summer camp. And the general takeaways from all of that was that there is one right way to live. You have to walk this narrow path, and then this huge idea of like you are a vessel, you are an empty vessel for God's work. Don't have self-confidence, have God confidence. And so from a young age, I just deny the self. And my sole aim in life was to seek God's will, not my own at all, and be a vessel through which he could do good on the earth. And it just ended up being a lot of, um, yeah, self-denial, sacrifice, not really knowing how to identify what I wanted. And then even if I did identify that, like choosing to do the exact opposite because of this feeling of like obligation to a higher calling. And it kind of just fell apart in my late 20s. I mean, I spent my entire 20s like journaling, reading books, like trying to figure out where I stood in all of this, like so much existential angst. And in my late 20s, there was just a series of events. I started climbing at a gym. I started dating for the first time, and I started therapy, and they all kind of like worked together to like break me out of the church and um And then that's where the pendulum clearly
Hmm.
swung.
Can you
Yeah,
tell me
trying to reclaim myself.
can you tell me a little bit more about those last two bullet points, the dating and the therapy? And yeah, actually, I just want to leave that
Yeah.
wide open for you and go take it wherever you'd like.
Um, yeah, I mean, th at least in the church that I was in and the family that I came from, um, there was this expectation that you didn't really date until you were ready to get married, and then you married the first person that you dated. And I I held that standard for my life, but I just don't fit into it. And nor do most people. I have family members that very much like kept that script going and married young to the first person that they dated. So I think some people it works for them better. Whether or not it really works, it works. Um, and so I met, I was climbing more. I went to the Bugaboos on my first real climbing trip, and I met somebody there, and that was my first adult relationship. I was a virgin, and also like sexual purity is very just so important in the church, and the flavor of church that I was in. And it's kind of like a year in or year out. And I thought long and hard about the decision to like lose my sexual purity. And when I did, that was the switch that was flipped, where I was like, guess I'm not a Christian anymore. And then it was like I was able to turn away from this like way of thinking, and this I'm just picturing like this person turning around and this whole world opening up to them, full of like color, whereas the previous world was black and white, and full of nuance and all these new experiences that were now available and accessible to my 28-year-old self. And I mean, yeah, it was a really powerful time of life. And therapy. And then I started therapy and started like unpacking all sorts of stuff around growing up with religion, growing up in my family, um, denying myself, not having a self, never being able to make decisions for myself because I didn't have like a internal foundation. And so, like little by little during this time, I just started to form more of a sense of who I was and what I wanted. And it felt like I was being born for the first time. And climbing was a huge part of that. I remember starting to lead climb, which is where you're on the sharp end of the rope. You are putting the rope up on the wall, and there's potential for falling. And it's scary. It's really scary. You could fall quite a long ways, and you're putting protection in as you go. But um, I remember this sense of like freaking out on the wall, yelling to my belay partner down below, and realizing that they couldn't do anything for me, and that the only person that could help me in that moment was myself. And I had never felt that before. There had always been God, and like I never valued myself. And in those moments of like climbing more and going to therapy, just realizing that there was that I was the only one that was gonna live life for me. And so, yeah, it was big, era of my life, like
Hmm.
of growth. Yeah.
Is it a stretch to say that you took all the faith that you
Mm.
previously held in Christianity and you put it into like yourself as a person who does stuff in the outdoors, in the mountains, into Jenny the climber and mountain athlete?
Yeah, that good. I've never really thought about it that way, but I yeah, in some ways, yeah, it became like the new driver, the new like foundation. But I think it took a while at that point to like really to build a solid foundation. Because I mean, when you live for 28 years with your foundation in one place, it takes a while to gain. I think I'm still gaining faith in this,
Hmm.
in myself. But yeah.
How did your relationship with your parents or your family, more broadly speaking, evolve when you left the church?
Um, my dad he's an intellectual, and I think he was a person that I brought my questions to, and his way of embracing faith was a bit more open, and so it felt like I had an ally in my dad. My mom, on the other hand, was devastated and would just she prayed for me to come back to the faith for years and years and years. And I, at this point in time, I was living in a house in Seattle with five girlfriends that were all Christians and from a summer camp that we all worked at together. And I moved out. I just felt like I needed separation and space to do exactly what Jenny needed to do and not to be just like a sheep in this way of living that I had known for so long. So I moved out, moved into a garage in Seattle and yeah, yeah, carved out more space for myself. And I still have some of those friendships. Gradually, some of those people have also left the church. And my parents left the church at like the age of 71 during COVID. They couldn't make sense of it with all the other stuff that was going around the
Huh.
religious right. And their church was anti-vax and they it finally fell apart for them too. So now we're all on the same team. But it was rocky there for a while.
Yeah, that's a really that's an age outside of the norm to leave
Totally.
the
I'm
faith
so proud of
practice.
them. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm, I want you to indulge me in a thought experiment, Jenny, which is let's say there's a parallel universe where you're born the same person, but you're just not as physically capable, and
Hmm.
so you didn't have this foundation as a young adult doing stuff in the mountains with your parents, and you were not able to become a dirtbag climber. So in this parallel universe where yeah, your body does not cooperate with your desires, um, where do you think you would go? And I think where do you think you would have gone? And another way to think about this question is, if all of a sudden tomorrow your body stopped
Hmm.
cooperating
Hmm.
with you, where do you think you would find purpose? Where do you think you would direct your energies?
Wow. Such a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is that I would need to find some other game to play, and like some other way of departing from routine and doldrums and like the the like holes that we can dig ourselves in life and find perspective and connection. And man, like the mountains are just like so the end all be all for me for finding that it feels hard to envision finding it elsewhere. I can envision finding games elsewhere though. The games that I've played with my housing, um, the games that I play with credit cards, which we haven't talked about, but air miles and like I think that I could see myself diving further into that, like buying houses and renovating them and renting them out and refinancing and doing it all over again. Or um, yeah.
You'd become a financial advisor.
I would not become a financial advisor, but I would try to find more games to play with finances for sure. I think that that's always just like fascinated me. Um, but I'm just thinking like the the place that mountains, the role they play in my life is so it's just like it's so important for me to just get away from standard living for periods of time and experience like life on blast in the way that you just have to be so present and so connected when you're in the mountains. And I don't know what else offers that.
Hmm.
I, and maybe I would dive super deep into meditation. I
Hmm.
did a meditation retreat last year, my first ever like silent meditation retreat. And there were people from all walks of life there, but the ones that really stood out to me were like the older people, the like 70-year-olds, maybe even 80 that were there. And the experience that I was having internally when I was there was really profound. And probably the most profound part of it was how present I was and how beautiful the present moment was, even though it was just at a meditation retreat. And I saw those older people, and it was like a vision to me of what I could do post climbing, like the things in
Huh.
life that I could have even when my body wasn't working anymore, that I could still go so deep into something and experience pure presence. And that is maybe the thing that I find most in climbing. And that meditation retreat helped me realize that it's accessible through meditation too.
Yeah,
It
thank you.
feels like an adventure of a different sort.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go with this. And I
Yeah.
think one of my missions with this podcast, this line of research, is really figuring out what people who have this dirtbag ethos, especially people who do it in the outdoors, but it can apply to many other fields in life also. Yeah, how it's long term sustainable for them.
Hmm.
And I think for someone like you who's just like so into your body and being in these wild and remote places, this question of like if and when that no longer becomes accessible to you,
Hmm.
where do you focus your energies? Where do you derive this sense of meaning and this sense of calm, this presence, this, you know, almost spiritual level connection that you feel when you're in the mountains? And I
Yeah.
wonder, you know, how much you can even prepare for that ahead of time. Um, and for myself, I think I've had a bit more of a diversified portfolio, and I think it's a
Hmm.
bit easier for me to quickly answer that question. I think I would focus more on books and writing,
Hmm.
maybe contributing to this kind of world of education. And so for someone like you who's so like singularly focused on the mountains, that I'm really curious about how you think about that, and maybe how other people in your community who are similar to you seem to be thinking about it or not thinking about it, you know, avoiding it.
Yeah, I think maybe avoiding is the more proper way of thinking about it. But yeah, I'm so grateful that I found meditation. And I think a lot of us climbers are kind of like in search of um, extreme emotion. Like I think of us as being not dissimilar from like, I don't know, junkies in a way. Like we are constantly searching for the next release from reality. Um, and like, and high. There's no better way to put it than searching for the next high.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think the places to find that in a healthy way, you have to be creative. Like, I don't want to become a junkie and I don't want to become an alcoholic, but I think I want life to be on blast every now and then.
Hmm.
And like, I need a feeling of like pure presence every now and then. And I'm, yeah, so I'm so grateful that I found meditation as like a way to do that without my body,
Yeah.
like just sitting. Yeah.
All right. Last big question for you, Jenny, on the theme of long-term sustainability. In which way do you feel like your life up to this point, and so maybe let's talk about your life post leaving the church, um, has not yet felt sustainable or not working, or something
Mm.
that's kind of an unresolved worry or anxiety for the future, and you're not fully confident that you're going to be able to solve this? Is there anything like that in your life?
Oh yeah, I mean, the big thing that comes to mind is my relationship status. And I, since like, you know, leaving the church and dating, I've had a lot of relationships and I'm currently single and I'm 40. And so this idea of building a life with someone and having a family is feeling like it's like slowly drifting away. And I've spent a lot of time grieving that. Like I've really felt it this last year in the build up to 40. Um and I'm in a much better place with it now than I was a year ago. Um but I would say that it's still a place where I don't know if it's working. Like right now I feel very content to be single and the freedom that that offers me is gold to me. Like it's so special to me and it makes me feel alive. But I can't help but think that like I'm missing out on something that a lot of humans get to experience, like the level of connection that you get when you are partnered. And yeah, I don't think that it's mutually exclusive. Like I don't think my lifestyle is the reason why I'm not partnered at all. I think that there are many answers to that question, but some of them lie in my religious upbringing and like attachment stuff, and also just loving my independence. I'm not particularly like driven to find someone to be with. So, but I think it is something I think about a lot. It is something that I went back to therapy for recently. And the coolest part of going back to therapy to figure out why Jenny Abegg is single is like 3 months in, I I'm more in acceptance of the fact that I'm single than I was 3 months ago. I don't
Mm,
feel like it's necessarily given me a plan or um, a really firm set of answers as to why I'm single, although I feel like we've explored that and I've gotten some answers. But more than anything, it's helped me realize that there are no shoulds. Like, and this idea that I am 40 and should be married and having kids, I can throw that out the window because what I'm doing right now is working for me and it feels good. And the part of it that doesn't feel good is the comparisons and the feelings of should. And and so acceptance is like a huge piece of what I've gotten from the process of therapy. Um, but I'll continue to wonder about it, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Jenny, if anyone wants to follow your adventures and exploits online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh man, I could be better at sharing my adventures and exploits. But I do have an Instagram. I post on it from time to time and it's JBEG, JABEGG. And then go to Better Trail, follow Better Trail on Instagram, bookmark us as your like new way of researching outdoor gear. That's like there's not much about me on that website, but there's a lot of me infused in it. So yeah.
Jenny, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Blake.